Hello and welcome to the Tennessee Informer. Thank you all for being with us tonight. Today was the day we had rescheduled Jeff Cobble to come on and talk about jury nullification, but unfortunately he's had an additional issue come up and can't be with us tonight. I promise we'll get him back on the show in the future. Well, we're less than a week away from the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Last week on the show, we had G.R. Mobley from reclaimingtherepublic.org on the show to talk about some of the documents, about the document and his site. It's an excellent site with some great information. I encourage you to read it and visit tncss.weebly.com as well, which my friend and founder of Tennessee Citizens for State Government, Karen Bracken, created. Both have some great historical content. I'll have some commentary on the upcoming 4th of July and the Informer Report right after a word from our sponsor, LifeWave. Are you looking for more energy, better recovery, and a healthier you without the use of drugs or stimulants? What if your body could actually do the work itself? Check out LifeWave and we'll be right back.
Light, the energy of life itself. Since the beginning of time, light has sustained us, fueled our growth, and shaped the world. Even Einstein recognized that everything we are is made of light. But what if we could harness the light within us, not just to live, but to renew, restore, and rejuvenate? Introducing LifeWave X39, the first product in the world that activates stem cells using our body's own light. Backed by clinical research, multiple patents, and over 10 years of stem cell research, a revolutionary wearable light technology that unlocks the power of activating our own stem cells with a single, safe, affordable, non-transdermal patch that puts you back in control of how you look, feel, and perform. Unlike drugs or chemicals, X39 works naturally, awakening your body's ability to heal and thrive. It's time to unlock your full potential, restore your vitality, and embrace a healthier, more vibrant you.
Welcome back, and now it's time for the Informer Report. Iran and the $300 billion in the MOU. Now, I was doing these notes last night, and I understand things have changed since then. I guess there's supposed to be a meeting today in Doha between the U.S. and Iran. But in the MOU, one of the items, and I saw Ted Cruz talking about this the other day. I'm not a huge Cruz fan, but he was pointing out the fact that if in any way, shape, or form we are going to facilitate Iran getting $300 billion, that's just wrong. And it's, it just really kind of defeats the whole purpose. I mean, that's more than what Obama gave Iran. So even if it's not our money, if we are going to do something to facilitate them getting $300 billion, that is insane. So I hope that doesn't happen. I hope we're not going to be funding terrorism, which is what we'll be doing if we give Iran $300 billion. Granted, it's an MOU. It's not a treaty. I don't know what we're going to end up with. I really don't know what we're going to end up with. So we'll just have to wait and see on that. Our Senate has failed us again, and they failed us in a lot of ways. First, I want to talk about the war powers. So last week, towards the end of the week, the Senate finally joined the House in passing a resolution basically saying that, the president does not have unlimited power, and they were going to restrict his powers in accordance to the Constitution. Regardless of what you think about Iran and whether or not we should have taken them on or not, the bottom line is, at some point in time, the Congress, the House and Senate, have to step up. They have to be involved. Our Constitution was not created for the president to run the whole show when it comes to war. And anyway, so they did pass a resolution, and the talk was, well, we'll have to wait and see how Trump reacts to this. But I guess they had a meeting, and he was able to convince two of the senators to back off the resolution. Surprisingly, one of them was Rand Paul, one of the few people up there who has any clue about the Constitution and usually stands up pretty well for it. But they backed off. Once again, they failed in one of their responsibilities. Another responsibility they've failed in has to do with election security. the SAVE Act, which there are issues with the SAVE Act. It's not perfect by any means. I think most Americans want it. I know we have to do something about our elections. I think most of us don't really have any confidence in them, and we don't really have any reason to have any confidence in them. And so, but Trump, as I understood it, was going to tie the SAVE Act to the housing bill, the affirmative housing program, whatever it was. Anyway, it's interesting. That has since changed, and I'll fill you in on that in a second. But that housing bill, Tim Burchett from Tennessee voted against it. Now, Marcia voted for it. And of course, he's all Marcia, but he pointed out the fact that in that housing bill that there were loopholes that would help fund illegal aliens to get housing. So I'm glad he voted against it. Marcia voted for it. I'm not sure how Rose voted on that one. But they were going to take, one bill and hold it hostage to another bill that had its problems as well. From what I understand now, by the way, the Senate, they adjourned, so that did not, nothing was going to happen right away. The Senate went ahead and adjourned, even though they all have all these things that they need to be taken care of, they adjourned. But apparently, the latest thing I'm hearing is that they're going to try to do the SAVE Act through reconciliation. And I'm not an expert on the reconciliation project, the way that works process, but apparently there's a lower threshold. I think it removes the ability of the Senate to hide behind the whole 60-member rule. The whole filibuster deal. So we'll see what happens with that, whether or not we get the SAVE Act. Remains to be seen. Supreme Court opinions on immigration. Now, we've had some wins on that lately. Trump will be allowed to speed up the whole deportation process. That was something that was on hold. Also, he's going to be able to get rid of the Haitians and the Syrians that are over here, that have been over here for years on temporary status. He's able to get rid of them. Still no word yet from the court on what they're going to do with the big issue of birthright citizenship. And I imagine that we won't find that out until late Thursday. That's my guess, since we didn't hear it this past Friday. They will probably drop that late Thursday, right, going into the 4th of July holiday. That would be my guess. Trump has done some good things on immigration for sure. The borders are closed. They've deported a lot of people. A lot of people are self-deported. That's a good thing. I still think we probably would have been better off spending the effort and the money on getting all the illegals out of here than taking on Iran at the time when we did. Apparently, it's obvious that we underestimated their resiliency and their ability to withstand what we could throw at them. That doesn't mean they're not a dangerous country. That doesn't mean we don't need to deal with them. But when you go to war, you got to have a pretty good idea of what's going on, and I don't think we really did. I think somebody whispered in Trump's ear and played to his ego, and I think that's why we went in when we went in. That's just my opinion. The Islamic invasion. Now, we hear about this all the time, and it's a real thing. It's a real threat. And it's not just the Islamic invasion. You have the communists. You have the Red-Green Alliance. Oh, by the way, Trump did call out the fact that, we have to worry about the communists that now have taken over the Democrat Party. They took over the Democrat Party a long time ago. I mean, the Democrat Party has been communist, socialist, whatever you want to call it, for decades. They've just gotten worse. It's more blatant now. And it's not just the communists. Now, he's talked about the communists, but he really hasn't called out the Islamists. It's both of them. They're working together. They are working together to subvert this country. And that's just a fact. Now, we see that Texas is having issues. Any state where you have any sizable number of Muslims, you're going to have issues. And they are a threat, okay? Bottom line, they are a threat to our way of life. Monty Fritz here in Tennessee did send a letter to Governor Lee, asking that he declare CARE, Council on American Islamic Relations, and related organizations. He mentioned AMAC, which is a Tennessee-based organization, American Muslim Advisory Council, based out of Nashville, and they've had some real bad actors that certainly had links to CARE. Now, one of the things you may not know about CARE is, the FBI used to recognize them as a problem. The Holy Land Foundation trial back in 2007, 2008, CARE was an unindicted co-conspirator. And at the time, the understanding was that CARE was Hamas. Well, Hamas was a designated terrorist organization by our country. So, we've got some bad actors here, and they are not here just to get along. They are not here to just, be another religion. No, they are here to take over. That's what they are here to do. They've stated it. I mean, this is not me making it up. This is what they have said. So Monty Fritz asked that the governor declare them terrorist organizations. I have no belief that Governor Lee will do that. Odds of that are very slim. But I'm glad that Monty did it, and I think Monty Fritz, despite what a lot of people believe, I think he has a very good chance of winning this race. And it's good to know that if he wins, we'll have a governor that recognizes the threat posed by Islam and that he'll take action. Now, I've got to hit on this just a little bit. There was a interview that he did about a month ago with Phil Williams. He's a bleeding heart, lived there in Nashville, Channel 5. And you got to watch the whole interview, not just the edited stuff that he sent out. One of the questions he asked Monty was, would you ban Islam if you could? Would you ban Islam if you could? And Monty said yes. Well, any person with common sense and any Christian, the answer should be yes. You would ban Islam if you could. All right? So he didn't say he was going to ban Islam. Number one, the governor doesn't have the authority under the Tennessee Constitution to do that, okay? Monty knows that. Phil knows that. But to the question of would you ban them if you could? Yeah, the answer would be yes. Any other answer is stupid. Any other answer tells me that you don't recognize the threat they pose, the threat they posed by what they have declared they intend to do. So I'm glad to see that he's, willing to stand up. We have somebody that recognizes the threat and is willing to stand up. He did not say that he would ban them. He did not say that he was going to ban them. He said he would if he could. Nothing wrong with that. Anybody in their right mind would ban Islam. Marsha Blackburn, she's got this deception going. Marsha's always involved with deception. Now, a few weeks ago, Trump said, he announced publicly that he was not going to endorse either Marsha Blackburn or John Rose. He said that. And everybody, heard that if you were paying any attention. But now Marsha is trying to make it appear that he has. She does it with flyers. She does it with ads on TV. But he has not endorsed her. He said he was not going to. This just goes to show you how deceptive this woman is. And that's all for this edition of the Informer Report tonight. We're going to be celebrating 250 years of independence this Saturday, July 4th. Are we going to make it to 300? Will we even make it another year? Do we even understand what the document did? Have we learned anything over the last 100 years? What has to happen for the republic that was created after the revolution to be restored and to continue? I got several thoughts on this, obviously. First, about what did the actual document do? We'd like to look at it as our birthday, but really what the document said was that these states should be free and independent states. And if you read the preamble to the Declaration, it says, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth a separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. So these were the 13 colonies separating. You can call it seceding if you want. It was essentially a secession from Britain. That's what it was. And of course, it was signed by all 13 states. Some states had already, Virginia had already done a declaration. There were some other states, if I'm not mistaken, that had done that. But this was just like a joint action. Think of it as coalition warfare, saying, hey, we collectively are separating. It didn't actually, they weren't separating to make one country initially. Okay, that's not what they did when they separated. And if you look at the end of the revolution, you can look at the treaty they signed in Paris. It was signed by all 13 states, representatives from all 13 states. And the states were named by, they were named in the document. Okay, they were actually named in the document. And let me back up here. I think they did actually have somebody come and sign, but all the states were named. So it did not create one initially. That was actually done via force through the Civil War, and that's a topic for another time. But I want to think about the things that led up to the Declaration of Independence, and we hit on that some last week. They took a lot of abuse, really starting from about 1763, after the French and Indian War ended, which many of them were veterans of. Washington was a veteran of it, and as were many of the people who later fought in the Revolution. And there was just so much abuse. Their assemblies were dissolved, their governments were dissolved, they were not allowed in many cases to hold trials. Trials would be held over in England. The taxes, it was not the amount of the tax, it was the fact that they were paying taxes, being taxed by Parliament. They didn't, that's where the whole representation issue comes in. Other things more serious, they were being attacked by Indians at the encouragement of the British. Also, let's not forget they brought the Hessians over, the German soldiers. So all these things happened before the Declaration of Independence. Remember, the Declaration of Independence is in 76, but the fighting actually started in 1775. You had Lexington and Concord in April of 1775 when they were attempting to take their guns, take their cannons, take their powder. And that set off, the battles of Lexington and Concord. Not long after that, Battle of Bunker Hill. And then it went on so we've been at war for almost a year before they actually signed the Declaration of Independence. Another thing, now, I mentioned the reclaimingtherepublic.org site. That's a good site. If you want to go read not only the Declaration and read all the specifics, you can read the original Declaration that Thomas Jefferson wrote, and there's things that were taken out of it. One of the things he hit on was slavery. And it was interesting because they mentioned that the slave trade, encouraged by the king and others, and they were opposed to that. Matter of fact, they had tried to outlaw that. In Virginia, they had tried to outlaw the slave trade prior. Well, so they weren't allowed to do that. But what they also did, what the British also did was they encouraged insurrections by the slaves who, were in the colonies, and that the colonists had tried to outlaw slavery. But now you have Britain encouraging insurrections. So that's just, a lot of bad things went on. And I don't know, I've heard different stories about the percentages of how many people actually fought for independence versus how many were loyal, how many were just, hey, just don't bother me. I've heard that it was like a third of each. I've heard the number of patriots was even smaller, than that. There's only a small, we always hear about the 3%. So I don't know what the true answer is on that, but the odds were long. They were fighting the most powerful nation in the world. But here's another thing that we seem to forget, and we kind of hit on this a little bit last week. Most of the rights that they felt like they were fighting for, and those were rights that they felt they were endowed by their creator with, were rights that they had recognized as just that they had as being Englishmen. British, the British Constitution, although it was not written all in one place, you can find it in the Magna Carta and English Bill of Rights and other places. That's what they believed. There was not a lot of, it wasn't like all their ideas of what they were fighting for were new. I think one of the things that was new was, okay, we're no longer going to bow to this idea of the divine right of kings. And basically, their liberty was more important to them than remaining part of Britain, even though many of them had fought for Britain just, in the late 1750s, early 1760s, and considered themselves British. They were proud to be British, but when it came down to their God-given rights or remaining part of Britain, they're like, hey, we're just not going to tolerate this. We're going to do what we have to do to be free. What I wonder about is, I'm not suggesting another Declaration of Rights, but if you look, and even though the abuses that they endured were pretty severe, I think they pale in comparison, as I said last week, to what we have put up with for the last 100 years in this country. The amount of power the federal government has. A funny thing, too, if you read some of the early documents, you kind of read it and you're like, what they were experiencing prior to the revolution, prior to Britain really cracking down on them and deciding, we're going to get whatever we can out of these colonies, starting in the 1760s, around 1763, after the French and Indian War. They very much had a setup, kind of like what we ended up with under the Articles of Confederation, and really even the Constitution. They didn't oppose Britain making big decisions on, like, who we went to war with and certain other big government things that they're like, okay, yeah, that's a legitimate function of the crown. They didn't really object to a lot of that, but they had been operating, as we used to say in the Army, away from the flagpole for a long time, and for the most part, they had been allowed to kind of do their own thing. That and their belief and understanding of their rights as Englishmen, as British citizens, and so they very much, within each colony, were allowed to self-govern. Big ticket items were still, issues of war and certain other things were still, treaties and whatnot, were still the right of the crown, and they understood that. And so they kind of lived under, to some degree, what we ended up with initially with the Articles of Confederation and then later the Constitution, or the Constitution as intended anyway. And so I just wonder if after 250 years, number one, I don't think most of us realize what they went through, the hardships they went through, the risks they were taking. There was no guarantee that these guys were going to succeed. It was not guaranteed. It was not like, hey, you know what? If we just hold out for 8 years, we'll be okay. They'll leave. The odds were stacked against them. They were stacked against them in numbers. They were stacked against them in finances, you name it. Now, granted, they did have some terrain advantages, no doubt. And for the Brits trying to man a force in the field, especially in areas where they didn't have any support, that's definitely a challenge. But the Brits had a lot of support in different spots throughout the war. And, like I said, not everybody was a patriot. You had a lot of Tories and Loyalists that fought against our guys. So it was a civil war and a war for independence all at once. But not only do I wonder if we recognize, and I really don't think we can really get our heads around what they endured and what they risked, but are we willing in this day and age to do what we need to do? And I'm not suggesting that we have to go to war with our government. That's not what I'm saying. But to start standing up for our rights in the Constitution. That's what they did. Because look, remember, 1763 and it was 1775, really before shots were fired. Okay, there were some people killed prior to that. You had the Boston Tea Party and some things here and there. But the fighting started roughly 12 years later. So it was not like an overnight thing. You know, it's not like, hey, you know, they just decided, hey, let's have a revolution. They did everything they could, you know, protesting, boycotting, and doing all these things before they actually took up arms. But have we actually, you know, we seem to bet everything on political parties. And we seem to think that, I mean, and obviously voting is important. I got it. And, you know, elections have consequences. But elections are not supposed to have the kind of consequence. We're not supposed to just accept some of the garbage that we've accepted over the years just because of elections. I mean, we still have rights. Our Constitution still recognizes our God-given rights. But we seem to think that that we're going to be saved by electing the right people. We're going to get the right president. We're going to get the right Congress, the right Supreme Court, which I've got some serious issues with that, and we'll hit on that again in a minute. We seem to think that. I mean, we need to have a better understanding of our rights. And you can only do that if you study. And if you really want to study and get the intent of the founders, whether you're talking about from the Revolution through the writing of the Constitution, you need to read the primary documents. You know, you can just read a certain author, but a lot of authors have bias. But if you read the primary documents, it gives you a better idea of what was at stake and what they believed, what they understood their rights were, and what they were fighting for. You can't you can't just rely on what you learned in high school, which was probably BS. What you learned in college, especially depending on when you went, was probably more than likely BS. So you have to do some studying and understand what your rights were. Not just the rights they were fighting for, but the rights that were recognized in our Constitution. And I don't think we do that enough. And I think we rely too much. We have given up so much power to our federal government. We've allowed them to make decisions that they were never intended to make. They had limited powers. The Constitution gives them limited powers. Just like the government of Britain and the King of Britain were supposed to have limited powers. That was the understanding of our founders. They fought because their rights were being abused. They fought because the king thought he could do whatever he wanted. Same thing with Parliament. Matter of fact, you know, you remember the Stamp Act and some of those other things that happened. Well, they protested, they got the Stamp Act lifted, and then of course the Townsend Acts were put on them, and then followed up with a declaratory act by Parliament basically saying, we reserve the right to legislate for the colonies on any matter whatsoever. Well, we've kind of accepted that in our time. We've accepted this insane idea that the Supreme Court can legislate from the bench on anything they want to. On life, on marriage, you name it. They can do that from the bench. And we've accepted that. And it's not just any one generation. I mean, we've been steadily losing rights. You know, and this, of course, if you've watched this show before, you know where I stand on this. We won't talk about the 1860s. We'll just talk about the 20s from then on. But we've accepted that the federal government can do pretty much whatever it wants. And because the Supreme Court said, you know, where in the Declaration does it say, we, hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by a Supreme Court? No, it says endowed by their Creator. You know, we always say we the people, and we always say our rights come from God. And then some people will say that, and in their next breath they'll say, the Supreme Court has said. I want to tell you right now, if you're not disgusted with the Supreme Court as an institution, historically, I'm not just talking about recent, okay? They've actually made some opinions, given some opinions of late that most conservatives agree with, myself included, on some of them. But I'm talking about historically. And it's really on us. We have allowed them to tell us that the court is the final arbiter of our God-given rights. Well, did our rights come from God or from the court? If they came from God, the court doesn't have anything to say about it. We have to get out of this mindset that the court is the final arbiter of everything. And sometimes that includes when they might make opinions or give opinions that we like the result of. We might like the result of some of their opinions. But we need to look, no matter how much we like the result of that opinion, look at, do they actually have the authority? Is this a power delegated to the federal government? Because if it's not delegated to the federal government, the court's part of the federal government. We've allowed them to usurp power, and we've put them on this pedestal. They don't belong on a pedestal. None of our federal government belongs on a pedestal. None of our government in general. But that's the other thing. You know, they are the ones who are supposed to keep the federal government in check. That includes the court. That includes federal agencies, most of which are unconstitutional. 95% of what our federal government does is unconstitutional and has been for about 80 years. Some of it for 100 years. Some of it a little longer than that. Some of it a lot longer than that. If we are going to continue to have anything to really celebrate on Independence Day, I mean, it's great that we broke away from England 250 years ago. I'm glad of that. But we've replaced it with a more tyrannical, all-powerful government than England ever thought about being. We allow things that the king would have never even considered doing. We've allowed them to shove this LGBTQ garbage down our throats. We've allowed them to fill our country up with communists and Islamists. Most of the problem, we got to do something different. And I don't know if we have it in us. You know, we've ignored some of the really good advice that our founding generation gave us. Washington said, avoid entangling alliances. What have we done? We've done nothing but for the last 100 plus years but be entangled. That's all we've done is be entangled. We ignored their advice on parties. We got people this is not a call to arms. I am going to mention this though. If you have seen what's going on in Europe, if you pay any attention at all, Western Europe's about shot. They have imported all these Islamists for all these years. And now they're fighting in the streets. Oh, but they're fighting without guns because only the government has guns. And of course, in many cases, the Islamists come into their country. They have to fight their government and the Islamists if they have a shot at being free. I'm not sure that's going to happen in some of those countries. I think England might be toast. Maybe not Ireland. We'll see. France, gone. Germany, gone. Those other countries are gone. The same thing will happen here if we don't step up. Now, there's a movie it's a European movie. And it deals with the situation over there. And it's all about not getting justice, about all these Islamists, all the murders and rapes they've committed over the years. And the movie's called Citizen Vigilante. I have not seen it yet. I've seen a little bit of it. But basically what it comes down to is, hey, you know, our government has done this to us. They're not protecting us. They've allowed all these rapes. They've allowed all these murders. They brought the people here. They want to continue to bring the Islamists here. And they want to treat the native people like criminals. And basically the theme of the movie is you got a citizen vigilante who is taking it into his own hands to fix the problem. I'm afraid that's what's the only way they're going to become free over there. If we wait too long here, if we don't get serious about electing people that understand our Constitution, respect our culture, and are willing to defend it, and are willing to push back and call out the Islamists and stop bringing any more over here, and where we can, prosecute them for the things they do. If we don't get serious about that, somewhere down the line, and I don't think it's too far, and you look what the problem they're having in Texas, and oh, by the way, Tennessee's got a lot more problems with the Islamists than you realize. I've been following this stuff for a while. They are more embedded than you realize. And they are here to rule. Our government at the federal and state level has been incompetent on this. Totally incompetent. If we don't want to have to literally fight in the streets in the not too distant future in this country, demand that they uphold them. I don't know that we have a whole lot of time left. We're not as far down the road as Europe, but I'm not sure that we have a whole lot of time left. These things can really go bad. They can go south really, really quick. Like Trump, to his credit the other day, did call out the communists. He did call out the communist influence in the Democrat Party. Not influence. I mean, they're run by communists, and they have been for decades. You go back to I think it was the 1944 election. I can't remember the socialist's name, but they asked somebody why he wasn't running. Oh, we don't need to run. The Democrats have adopted our platform. That was in 1940, 1944. It's only got worse since then. Of course, the GOP's not a whole lot better. We got like communists in the Democratic Party and communist light in the Republican Party. And I say that as a Republican. Throw me out if you want. I give a rat's ass. We better do something. We better step up. We better stop focusing on party. Your party should be the Constitution. That should be your party. And oh, by the way, this whole thing of I know this is going to make some people mad, but I want to put it out there. You know what? Talking about the courts. One of our big challenges of fixing our country is the perversion of the 14th Amendment that we've allowed. We've allowed the 14th Amendment to essentially become our Constitution, and not the 14th Amendment as passed. I won't even go into all the shady things that were done at the passage. I won't go into all that. But what I'm talking about is the fact that the 14th Amendment for the first 60, 70 years was just recognized as, hey, due process and equal protection means you can't treat blacks any different than whites. That's what it meant, that you had to treat citizens the same when it came to the law, when it came to protections, when it came to due process. That's all it meant. It was not the federal government dictating what due process was or what equal justice was, equal protection. But starting in the 1920s, that was the first time anything having to do with the First Amendment was adjudicated in a Supreme Court case. They finally implemented through the incorporation doctrine. 2010 is when they said the Second Amendment applied. Okay, now I like the Second Amendment. All the first 10 amendments were supposed to be a restriction on the federal government, not a restriction on state government. And when you do that, you turn it on its head. But even more importantly than that, as long as we allow this perverted understanding of the 14th Amendment, that the federal government gets to determine what the limits of the Bill of Rights are. They get to dictate what the Bill of Rights are to the state when the Bill of Rights were meant to be a limit on the federal government. And as long as we go along with this idea that the court is the final arbiter, we're never going to effectively fix our country. We're operating under a perverted version of the Constitution, the 14th Amendment version of the Constitution, and a perversion of the 14th Amendment. Now, they've made some decisions in the last few years that are an improvement in some cases, But as long as we allow the 14th to replace the Constitution, all those other guarantees in the Constitution don't mean anything, especially as long as we allow the court to be the one that makes the determination on those things. We have to have our states step up. All right, guys, I know I've kind of rambled tonight. Hopefully you got something out of it. Nothing else, I encourage you not just to read the Declaration of Independence, read the founding documents, and understand that we have to demand these things. Neither the federal government or the state government are going to do it on their own. So I hope everybody has a good and safe 4th of July. Keep your head on a swivel. We've got some people in this country that would like to take us out. So just keep that in mind. Keep your head on a swivel. So give me just a second here. I want to thank everybody for taking time to watch the show tonight. I know there's a lot of options to choose from when it comes to where you get your news and updates. We appreciate everybody's support. Check out our audio podcast on iHeartRadio, Spotify, and other platforms as well. Sign up for our weekly newsletter at our website, teeninformer.com. Find and follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We're very close to reaching 1,000 subscribers for our show. That's a super big milestone for us, and we want to thank everyone who watches and subscribes. This Thursday, the Stewart and Henry County chapter of the TFA will meet at 7 p.m. at the Stewart County Visitor Center in Dover. There will also be a Monty Fritz team member attending that will have yard signs for those that are interested. There will be a gubernatorial candidate forum at the Nunley Media Center, 6:30 p.m. in Linden, Tennessee. That's the Nunley Media Center, 6:30 p.m. in Linden, Tennessee. Monty Fritz will be there, as well as independent candidate Lauren Pinkston. Dr. Ken Berry will also be a special guest. There will not be a show the week of July 6th, but we will return the following Monday, the 13th, with our very special guest, Mindy Esposito Hergert. She'll be here to tell us about her new book titled The Convenient Lie. It's jam-packed with information about the misnamed Civil War, Reconstruction, and beyond. It challenges what most people think they know. It draws from original documents, first-hand accounts, and primary sources that are readily available to everyone, but are rarely examined. This book takes a closer look at one of the most defining periods in American history, not as it has been oversimplified, but as it actually unfolded. It's not a book of opinions. It's a return to the record. The events happened in order. It's time to put them back in order. Should be a great show. Don't miss it. Also, please take the time to check out the other shows brought to you by West Tennessee TV by going to myparishtv.com. You can find links to the Mike Weatherford Show and Sportscast with Jeremy Bucklow and others. Tomorrow, Mike welcomes Jonathan Lodge and David Webb, the candidates for Henry County Mayor, for a live debate. That should be good. And Sunday, July 5th, Jeremy welcomes in Aiden Spelling to talk about the upcoming fall football season. That's it for now. Good night from Paris, Tennessee, that is.